Looking back now, there were signs, but I didn't want to see them. My wife, Lisa, and I have been married for 7 years. We met in college and got married young. Back then, she was the adventurous, spontaneous type, always the life of the party, and I fell for her confidence. Over the years, though, that adventure started feeling more like recklessness. I'm Mark, a pretty laid-back, grounded guy, and I thought we balanced each other out. Or so I thought. Lately, things had shifted in our marriage. Lisa had become increasingly distant. At first, I brushed it off as stress from her job in marketing, which often had her traveling and meeting new clients. She'd always come back a bit more energized than usual, talking about the thrill of the road and how good it felt to be independent every once in a while. But there was something off in her tone, a sort of dismissive edge that I couldn't put my finger on. Then, the changes started becoming more obvious. She'd go out of her way to avoid spending time with me, always glued to her phone, laughing at messages that she'd claim were from work friends. She started dressing up more, wearing perfumes she'd never liked before. When I questioned her, she'd roll her eyes and call me paranoid, saying I was being clingy. A few weeks ago, Lisa told me she'd be going on yet another business trip. It was sudden, and the timing seemed strange since she'd just returned from one barely 2 weeks prior. When I asked why she had to go so soon, she got defensive, accusing me of trying to hold her back from advancing in her career. That shut me up, at least for the moment. The night before her trip, I noticed she was packing a little differently. She was folding her clothes with more care than usual, and I caught a glimpse of lingerie that I'd never seen before, tucked between her blouses. I wanted to ask her about it, but something held me back. I think, deep down, I was terrified of hearing the answer. So, I let her pack in peace, silently convincing myself that I was imagining things. The next morning, she left in a hurry, barely saying goodbye. She mumbled something about being late and pecked me on the cheek like I was an annoying roommate rather than her husband. Later that day, while cleaning up, I found a note on our bed. A note she had left for me, written as if it was some sort of joke. It read, "Dear, while I'm having fun with Trey, entertain yourself with our neighbor. I give you my full consent, and she won't mind your company. Moreover, she'll be thrilled if you let her husband watch you. After we take a break from family life and I return from my trip, I suggest we meet at a hotel to figure out where we go from here." At first, I couldn't process the words. My mind tried to twist it into some sort of twisted joke, but the cold truth settled in fast. Trey. I knew that name, a business partner she'd casually mentioned a few times, always with a laugh and a bit too much sparkle in her eye. By the time I finished reading that note, my hands were shaking. The nerve, the sheer audacity of her words left me seething. She hadn't even tried to hide it, almost like she wanted me to find out this way, to deliver this gut punch when I least expected it. I couldn't sit around and let it fester. I needed answers, so I called her. She didn't pick up at first. I tried again and again, and finally, on the 4th ring, she answered. Her voice sounded carefree, even a bit annoyed, as if I was interrupting something. "Mark, what is it?" "I'm busy. Busy. Busy with Trey, no doubt." I could barely get my words out. "Busy? Lisa, what the hell is this note you left me?" There was a pause on her end, and I could almost hear the smirk forming on her lips. "Oh, you found it." Her tone was casual, as if she'd left me a grocery list. "Look, Mark, don't act so dramatic. We both know this marriage has been on its last legs for a while now. I'm just exploring my options." "Exploring your options? By running off with some guy named Trey and leaving me a taunting letter?" I couldn't believe the audacity, the sheer disregard she had for me and for our marriage. But it got worse. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on. You're acting like I committed a crime. We're adults. Things like this happen. Besides," she added, her voice dripping with contempt, "maybe if you were a little more exciting, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut, but her insults were salt in the wound. I could hardly believe that the woman I'd spent years with, the one I dreamed of building a family with, was turning into a complete stranger right in front of me. The call ended with her coldly dismissing me, saying she'd see me when she got back, and that we could talk about it like adults. But the way she said it, as if I was some inconvenience in her grand new life, shattered me. I stood there, phone still in hand, feeling completely hollow. How did we get here? I started retracing every moment of our marriage, all those little things I'd brushed off over the years. The anger came in waves, surging up, followed by a deep, gnawing sadness. This was the woman I had wanted to grow old with, to share my life with. And here she was, tossing me aside like an old toy, telling me I wasn't exciting enough. The humiliation burned. Had I been nothing more than a placeholder while she chased her fantasies? I spent that night pacing around the house, unable to sleep. Memories of us flooded my mind. Our wedding day, the vacations, the late nights talking about our future. But each memory now felt tainted, like they were mocking me. She'd reduced everything we had to a disposable phase, something she could step away from whenever she pleased. When I finally managed to lie down, my thoughts turned darker. The idea of revenge started creeping into my mind, twisting through my rage and hurt. I wanted her to feel the same agony she'd inflicted on me, to understand just how much she'd taken for granted. But then, just as quickly, the sadness came back, and I found myself staring into the darkness, wondering how the hell I'd let things get this bad. After that sleepless night, something inside me snapped. The sadness had dulled, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. I wasn't going to sit around and be her fool. She wanted to leave a note, flaunt her affair, and laugh in my face? Fine. Two could play at that game. I'd make sure she understood exactly who she'd underestimated. The first step was simple. I decided to contact my neighbor, Sarah. Over the years, we'd exchanged the usual pleasantries, but we weren't close. She was a friendly, down-to-earth woman with a quiet husband who mostly kept to himself. But the thought of involving her in this made my stomach twist with both excitement and guilt. Yet I figured Lisa had given me permission in that twisted note of hers. Hadn't she? When I showed Sarah the note, her face went pale, her eyes widening in disbelief. She took a moment to process, clearly as shocked as I had been. After a long silence, she finally said, "I knew Lisa had a bit of a wild side, but I had no idea she'd, well, do this to you." I confessed my plan to Sarah, to use Lisa's own words against her, to turn this absurd, disrespectful consent she'd left me into a reality she'd regret. Sarah hesitated at first, clearly torn, but eventually, she nodded. She'd been feeling ignored in her own marriage, and maybe, just maybe, this act of rebellion gave her the same sense of vindication I was after. So we set it up. Sarah's husband would be out of town the same weekend Lisa was due back. She agreed to meet me at my house that evening, and to leave her car parked in my driveway. Just a subtle little touch, enough to spark suspicion if Lisa saw it. The weekend came, and so did the storm brewing in my chest. Every minute felt like a countdown to the moment she'd walk through that door, only to find the same cold disregard she'd served me. When Sarah arrived, we shared an awkward smile, both aware of the absurdity of what we were doing. It wasn't exactly something either of us had planned for, but the betrayal we both felt somehow made it feel justified. We shared a glass of wine, talking quietly, almost whispering as if Lisa could somehow hear us from wherever she was. Sarah looked nervous, but there was a spark of something in her eyes. A fire, maybe even excitement, mixed with the same resentment I felt. She told me about her own struggles, her own sense of being sidelined by a partner who had drifted away. Hearing her story somehow made my rage feel validated. I wasn't just some jealous husband losing his mind over a fleeting affair. I was a man standing up for himself, reclaiming the respect I deserved. At that moment, we weren't just two neighbors. We were two people bound by shared betrayal, taking a stand in the only way we knew how. We didn't cross any physical boundaries, but we spent hours talking, connecting, sharing a moment of quiet, rebellious solidarity. The symbolism was there, and that was enough. Then, Just as we'd anticipated, I heard the familiar sound of Lisa's car pulling into the driveway. My heart pounded as I glanced at Sarah, who gave me a small nod, her face a mixture of anxiety and resolve. We both knew that what happened next would leave a mark, that it would be a moment neither of us would forget, and one that Lisa would never see coming. Lisa slammed the front door open, and her heels clicked against the floor as she strode inside, not bothering to announce herself. I could almost see the smug look she wore, probably assuming I'd be sulking around, waiting for her to grace me with some half-hearted explanation. But instead, she walked into the living room, only to stop dead in her tracks at the sight of Sarah sitting next to me on the couch, both of us calmly looking up at her as if we'd been expecting her all along. Lisa's face twisted in shock, a mix of confusion and rage flashing in her eyes. She tried to mask it quickly, forcing a smirk as if to dismiss what she was seeing. But I could tell I had thrown her off balance, if only for a moment. Well, Mark. Didn't think you had it in you?" she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "Did you really think parading the neighbor around would make you look less pathetic?" I held her gaze, refusing to let her words sting. This time, I wasn't going to let her brush me off. "I just thought I'd take you up on your little offer, Lisa," I said calmly, gesturing toward the note she'd left, which I'd conveniently placed on the table for her to see. "You did say I should entertain myself with Sarah, didn't you?" Her smirk faltered, just for a second. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, her confidence cracking as she realized the joke was no longer hers to control. "Oh, please, that was just a suggestion. To loosen you up a bit," she scoffed, trying to regain control, but her voice wavered slightly. "You're just trying to make this bigger than it is. You're still so small-minded, Mark." The insults were like venom, each word meant to cut deeper, but they only strengthened my resolve. "Small-minded," I repeated, raising my voice for the first time. "You've spent this whole marriage tearing me down, Lisa, making me feel like I wasn't enough, like I was somehow holding you back. And all this time, you were running off with Trey, acting like our vows meant nothing." She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. "Oh, get over it, Mark. Not everything is about you. People get bored, they want excitement. I thought you'd be mature enough to handle that." I took a deep breath, the fury bubbling up but now grounded by something calmer, something more resolute. "Mature enough?" I repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. "Mature enough to handle being lied to? To be humiliated in my own home? You underestimated me, Lisa." I could see that she was starting to realize the gravity of what she'd done, the cracks in her arrogance widening. But instead of apologizing, instead of even trying to explain herself, she shrugged and muttered, "Well, maybe if you'd been a better husband, none of this would have happened." Her lack of remorse was staggering, and I knew then that there was nothing left to save. As Lisa's words hung in the air, each one dripping with blame and contempt, a strange calm washed over me. I had spent so much time twisting myself into knots, trying to be the husband she wanted, bending over backwards to accommodate her whims. But in that moment, as she looked at me with that cold, dismissive gaze, I realized there was nothing I could do to ever earn her respect. She simply wasn't capable of it. I stood up slowly, looking her in the eye. "You know what, Lisa? You've done me a favor." My voice was steady, surprising even myself. "Because now I see you for who you really are. A selfish, ungrateful woman who's willing to throw away everything for a cheap thrill." She rolled her eyes again, dismissing me as if I were some pest in her way. "Oh, spare me the drama, Mark. You're not some hero in a movie." "No," I replied, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "But I am done being the fool in yours." Without another word, I turned and walked to our bedroom, where I had already packed a bag. I'd spent that sleepless night planning my exit, preparing for this exact moment. I had contacted a lawyer earlier that day, and the divorce papers were already in motion. Lisa had no idea how quickly her world was about to come crashing down. As I walked out of the bedroom with my bag, I glanced back to see her standing there, looking somewhat taken aback but too proud to show any real emotion. "What, you're just leaving?" she asked, trying to sound unfazed but failing. "Yes, Lisa. I am," I replied, holding her gaze one last time. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." Before I left, I turned to Sarah, who had been quietly observing the entire confrontation. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, giving her a nod of appreciation. She smiled, a silent acknowledgement of the shared strength we'd found in each other. Then, without another word, I walked out the door, leaving Lisa to face the consequences of her actions on her own. As I drove away, a strange sense of freedom settled over me. I'd been caged by her disrespect for far too long, and now, for the first time, I felt like I was finally taking my life back. It's been a few weeks since that night, and I'm still coming to terms with everything that happened. Some days, I wake up feeling liberated, like I've shed a weight I didn't even realize was crushing me. Other days, the sadness sneaks back in, reminding me of the dreams I had built around someone who turned out to be a stranger. But with each passing day, I feel a little stronger, a little more myself. The divorce process is moving along smoothly. Surprisingly, Lisa hasn't fought me on much. Maybe she's too wrapped up in her new life with Trey, or maybe she realizes that she's lost any leverage she once had. Either way, I'm done caring. I've started reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I had let fall to the wayside, and I'm even seeing a therapist to work through the hurt she left behind. Slowly, I'm rebuilding. If there's anything I've learned from this mess, it's that people can surprise you, sometimes in the worst ways. But you can't let someone else's betrayal define you. Looking back, I realize I had allowed Lisa to chip away at my self-worth, convincing me that I was the problem, that I needed to be more to keep her happy. But the truth is, no amount of bending or compromising would have ever satisfied her. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a stage to perform on, and I was just the backdrop. So, to anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation, trust your gut. Don't ignore the little signs that something isn't right, and don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. If someone truly loves you, they won't make you question your worth or leave you feeling like an option. And if they do, walk away, because life's too short to waste on people who don't value you. I may not have the family I dreamed of anymore, but I have my dignity, my self-respect, and a fresh start. And in the end, that's worth more than any hollow relationship built on lies.